Joaquin El Chapo Guzman sits in his cell at ADX Florence, a supermax prison in the United States. This place is known as escape-proof, meaning no one can break out. El Chapo hasn't seen any natural light in years, and because he spends 23 hours a day in his lone small cell, he only gets about 1 hour outside, but even then, he's in another cage. The guards watch him all the time to make sure he can't escape. El Chapo used to be one of the most powerful and feared men in the world. He was the boss of a huge drug empire making billions of dollars, but now he's locked away, living a very different life from what he used to have. Today, we're going to learn why this man ended up in such a place. But first, let's start by learning how El Chapo, a poor boy from the mountains of Sonora, Mexico, became the most famous drug lord ever known. No matter what people say about Chapo, you can't really deny that he was a hardworking guy. He was born on April 4th, 1957 in a poor family in La Tuna, Sonora, Texas. This was a small farming community, and his parents, Emilio Guzman Bustillos and Maria Consuelo Loera Perez, probably not pronouncing the names as great as I could because I'm not from Mexico, but it is what it is. They were all farmers. Life was tough for young El Chapo, and his 2 younger sisters and 4 younger brothers didn't make it any easier. It was so tough that he had 3 older brothers that had all died when they were very young. To make enough money, his family didn't just farm though, they also grew opium poppies, which can be turned into heroin. El Chapo showed that he was actually different from a young age. He quit school in the 3rd grade, not knowing how to read or write well, and decided to start his own business. To help his family, he sold oranges and candies, but it was never enough to please his strict father. His mother, however, saw something special in him. When El Chapo was a kid, he used to cut up pieces of paper and bundle them with rubber bands, pretending like he had lots of money. His mom remembered how he used to count and then recount these bundles, dreaming big even back then. But life wasn't always easy for El Chapo. Sometimes when his dad came home, he'd get angry and then hit him with a belt. El Chapo would scream, but his dad really didn't stop, even if there was yelling involved. After the beating, he had to give up all the money that he had earned. His mom could only watch, scared of his dad, feeling sorry for her son and angry at her husband. El Chapo finally left home at the age of 15 years old, looking for a way out of poverty. He found it in growing and selling illicit substances. Specifically one plant that we all know, known as the Mary Jane, that could make him a lot of money in the United States. He learned to trade from his uncle, Pedro Aviles Perez, who was a pioneer in selling Mexican Mary Jane to the Americans. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Mary Jane was a popular kind of choice among people in the US. I mean, it still kind of is pretty popular. It was cheap to grow but bulky, and it smelled pretty odd. It kind of smells like skunk, which made it tricky to transport. It's tough to pinpoint the exact prices because they vary depending on location and seller, but back in the 1970s when disco was hot and the hippie era was giving way to the more self-indulgent side of it, the drug trafficking scene shifted dramatically. Once again, everything can be blamed on the hippies. Coke became the new big money maker, a trend that continues even today. However, let's hold off on discussing the war on drugs until later. In 1978, El Chapo's uncle was assassinated by federal agents, likely set up by a rival trafficker. This event would mark the rise of Miguel Gallardo. Known as the original Mexican drug lord, he became untouchable with officials and politicians in his pocket and connections in Colombia, the source of all the white plant that he was using, or the white substance. Gallardo formed alliances with other Mexican traffickers, creating a federation of traffickers with their own territories. Then, in 1984, everything would change. The Mexican military raided and destroyed a huge Mary Jane plantation owned by Gallardo Guadalajara cartel. The mastermind behind the operation was the US DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena Salazar. This big plantation made the cartel lots of money, about $8 billion each year. So with the help of some crooked officials in Mexico, Gallardo had Camarena taken away. They tortured him for 30 hours using heavy things and drills, and then wrapped his body in plastic and left it in a field. The DEA was very clearly not happy about this, so they started looking into it. They had some success because by 1989, both Gallardo and his helper, Rafael Quintero, were in jail. When the big leaders like them got caught, there's usually pretty much a power vacuum, so there is a power struggle involved with it. And this means a lot of fighting and violence as people tried to take control. After the Federation broke up, different cartels did their own different things. One of them was the Sinaloa cartel. By the late 1980s, they were already making millions smuggling this white powder. In the 1990s, things got even better for them at least, probably not for anybody else involved. And then by 1995, the DEA said the new boss was El Chapo Guzman, after his partner, Hector Luis Palma Salazar, got arrested. So they were really good at smuggling. They dug tunnels to sneak stuff into the USA, and sometimes they used planes too. One of the smartest tricks was was actually hiding this white substance in cans labeled La Comadre with chili peppers and shipping them to the US by train and truck. It's said that they moved around more than $400 million worth of this white substance using this method. The people packing the cans at the warehouse even got high from just the fumes themselves. The Colombians were so impressed with how fast that they moved things, they started calling El Chapo El Rapido. Some people in Sinaloa started calling Chapo Santa Claus and Robin Hood because he was putting a lot of money into the state's roads, schools, and hospitals. Many thought that he was doing more good than any politician ever had. And to be honest with you, that doesn't seem very hard to do because politicians are kind of crappy anyways. I'm going off subject, but if anyone ever tried to stop him, they usually wound up dead. Then in 1989, there was a big fight between the Felix brothers and the Tijuana cartel and Chapo's guys from Sinaloa. To keep it short, Chapo sent one of his top guys to meet with the brothers, but Ramon Felix killed him instead. The brothers even ordered their men to kill the guy's family to stop any revenge. These brothers were really dangerous. They started a horrible trend of beheadings and once threw innocent family members off a tall bridge. Mexico was getting worse and El Chapo wasn't going to just kind of let these insults go unanswered. In the early 90s, his men started killing members of the Tijuana cartel. This made the Mexican government realize that they had to do something. They couldn't just let people keep getting assassinated and assassinating each other. That's not really good for your country's look, I think. But even though the politicians and police were getting rich from the drug money, they still kind of figured, we need to do something. In 1992, the Felix brothers shot at Guzman with AK-47s as he drove through Guadalajara. Luckily, Guzman would then go on to escape. But soon after, some of El Chapo's men pretending to be police officers stormed into a nightclub and started shooting. 6 people would meet their end, but the Felix brothers would go on to escape, reportedly hiding in the bathroom during the chaos. The violence then continued to escalate, with more lives lost in the ongoing turf war. But the most infamous incident came from May 24th, 1993 at the Guadalajara International Airport. Hitmen from the Tijuana cartel arrived, tipped off that El Chapo was there. Hiding in a white Mercury Grand Marquis, they riddled the car with bullets only to discover they had mistakenly killed Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, the Archbishop of Guadalajara. This shocking act of violence pushed the Mexican president Carlos Salinas de Gortari to take decisive action. El Chapo, who had been at the airport that day but escaped upon hearing the gunfire, demonstrated his exceptional ability to evade capture, becoming renowned as perhaps the best escape artist in Mexican criminal history. President Salinas and the people of Mexico, though, were quite furious. The Tijuana cartel realized that they had crossed a line, facing widespread condemnation and a bounty of $5 million for each of their leaders. El Chapo, meanwhile, prepared for the worst. He entrusted $200 million to a trusted associate to care for his family and ensured his cartel's operations would continue to smoothly go if he were caught. El Chapo even obtained a fake passport under the name of Jorge Ramos Perez, planning to hide out in Guatemala, although authorities were already on his tail. El Chapo paid the Guatemala military official $1.2 million to ensure his safe passage, but it turned out to be a setup. On June 9, 1993, Guatemalan troops captured him at his hotel near the Guatemala-Mexico border. Soon, he found himself on a military plane in handcuffs, heading to Mexico's Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 2. This prison was known for being tough, but having lots of cash kind of made things easier. Now, let's talk about El Chapo's first great escape. But before that, just how much money did he have at this time? It's kind of hard to say, because drug traffickers often claim that authorities exaggerate their wealth. The money from drug funds' huge operations involves many people. They don't file taxes and often keep their money hidden in offshore accounts. That's why the authorities rarely find all the millions or billions when traffickers are actually caught. And if the officials are corrupt, they might not report finding any money at all, which is very common out in Mexico. So to understand the scale, consider this. In 2022, the US seized nearly 1.2 million pounds of methamphetamine. The street value of that amount of meth would be around $3.6 billion. While no single person gets all that money, traffickers still make millions, even billions, after paying off officials, suppliers, transporters, and middlemen. At this moment, someone is trafficking the white substance, while someone else is probably snorting it or making something else out of it. It happens. So this could even be occurring in the restrooms of the US Capitol. Probably is, as the president declares war on drugs. Was really stupid. These events are real. And I think we all saw that video that was floating around of what was happening in the Capitol not too long ago. Yeah, I mean, everybody's human, man. So anyways, white powder might be used in the offices of Los Angeles tech companies, at upscale parties, or in suburban homes close to you, regardless of your location. The drug syndicates have an abundant supply of heroin also to distribute, and El Chapo was a famous drug lord. He was said to be making $2 to $4 billion a year at his peak, though he never had all that money in one place. Still, he was very rich and powerful, just like his enemies. To show how strong the cartels were and still are, when a cardinal, which again is a high-ranking Catholic priest, was shot, the Catholic Church in Mexico didn't think it was an accident. They asked, who would confuse a cardinal with a drug trafficker? They also noted that the cardinal had been talking a lot about Mexican politicians working with drug cartels. They believe the cardinal was killed on purpose with important people involved. So, do you really think El Chapo, with his millions and great power, was going to stay in jail for very long? Absolutely not. He was sentenced to more than 15 years, but told TV cameras he was just a simple farmer. If that was true, it's strange that he had servants in prison and even the guards did what he wanted. He was treated like a king, ran his empire from his fancy cell, and his brother and business partner, Arturo, could come and go freely as they liked. Investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez said El Chapo contacted judges and politicians from prison and regularly met with his business partners. It later came out in court that El Chapo worked with the DEA, the agency that fights drugs, ironically. Just like any other drug agencies worldwide, sometimes they team up with the traffickers if they help catch the other traffickers. A U.S. critic said El Chapo tricked American agencies into fighting his rivals. A hitman named Juan Carlos Ramirez testified in a U.S. court that El Chapo bribed corrupt DEA agents with things like prostitutes, gifts, and apartments. Oh no! The government was corrupt? I can't believe it. Over time, God, that's not going to go over well. Over time, people said El Chapo practically owned the prison where he was held. When he got bored, he had prostitutes or lovers smuggled in, sometimes with Viagra pills. He had to go through some of the usual prison routines, like, seeing a psychologist and eating prison food, whatever that is. But after meeting El Chapo, the psychologist described him as self-centered, full of himself, smart, persistent, strong-willed, careful, picky, and secretive. During his life, El Chapo had 18 kids with 7 different women. One of them was Zulema Hernandez, a former police officer. She wrote to El Chapo while he was in prison. He wasn't good at writing, so he had someone help him, but in one of his letters, El Chapo expressed his plans to leave. He wrote to his love, mentioning that Christmas was approaching and nothing would make him more happy than to be near her. However, he acknowledged the uncertainty of the situation and he reassured her that he hadn't given up the idea of seeing her, but he couldn't promise a specific day because plans might not work out as intended. Sadly, she was later shot and killed with a Z carved into her body. This was the work of El Chapo's enemies, a group called Los Zetas. She had helped him run his drug business from prison, which was also extremely dangerous. After 8 years of living in luxury, though, El Chapo was accused in the US of laundering money and smuggling huge amounts of cocaine across the border, or the white powder as mentioned. To be honest with you, there's no way this is going to get monetized, and it seemed likely he would be sent to the US after Mexico's Supreme Court agreed to extradite him. He definitely didn't want to go to the US though, because it was going to be hard to bribe officers, so he planned to escape. On January 19th, 2001, one story says that he bribed a guard named Francisco El Chito Cambros Riviera. The guard then opened his cell and El Chapo got into a laundry basket. With the help of maintenance workers, he was wheeled out the front door and then El Chapo climbed into a car trunk and was driven to a gas station. Inside, he slipped out of the trunk and simply disappeared. Cambros ended up in prison for helping, but it turns out things didn't exactly happen just like that. Investigative journalist Anabel Hernandez found documents and videos showing Chapo didn't use a laundry basket. Instead, he walked out wearing a police uniform. High-ranking police and prison officials were paid to help him. They even gave him a police escort and were conveniently at the prison the next day to act surprised on TV about his escape. Experts later pointed out that the government wanted El Chapo to stop the violent drug wars, so they hoped he would unite the cartels under a new Pax Mafiosa like the old Federation. Critics said it seemed like authorities were only arresting Chapo's enemies for a while, making it seem like they were working with his Sinaloa cartel. And to make matters worse, El Chapo also got help from the banks. He needed to clean hundreds of millions of dollars, so he used the regular banking system to do it. El Chapo used banks like Wachovia in the US and HSBC in Europe to clean his money, which means it just basically turns money that's illegally gotten into legal tender so that you can do whatever you want with it. So even though these banks got caught and paid huge fines, which doesn't really matter, no one went to jail. See, there's this concept that if the actual punishment is only a fine, then if you're super rich, it doesn't really matter because it's kind of only a rule for people who aren't as rich. It's pretty crazy. But anyways, that's just the way society works. So the money from these fines wasn't really enough to even hurt these banks. So you could just say the authorities benefited from Chapo's drug money. So everyone seemed to win except for Chapo and the people hurt by the drugs. So after Chapo escaped in 2001, the drug war in Mexico continued to get worse. Murders and disappearances skyrocketed and the violence became even more brutal. Like those videos with chainsaws that you might have seen, that if you haven't seen them, don't go look those up. It will be permanently branded into your brain. You will not unsee that. So there was a big reward for catching Chapo, so he always traveled in like bulletproof cars and had armed guards. In Mexico, people actually made him a legend, singing songs about him. Authorities would then raid his house and arrested people all over Mexico trying to find him, but he was like a ghost. In 2004, the Mexican Air Force found him at a party, but he ended up getting away. Journalists later said maybe they never really meant to catch him. They just wanted to look good fighting drugs, and it's all about the optics. The same thing happened a year later, but they were only a few minutes late. They took his laptop and some photos, burned down his ranch, and then destroyed his cars on TV. In 2005, Chapo was seen in a restaurant with 15 guards carrying big guns, and one of the men told everyone in the restaurant to stay put and not use their phones. Chapo came in, ate steak, shook hands, and paid for everyone's meal. Some people think stories like this were exaggerated, though, to make him seem like a hero in Mexico. Remember, it's still a lot of drugs. People's lives get ruined by this crap. So in 2006, Mexico's President Felipe Calderon, probably mispronounced that, promised to stop the violence from drug cartels by using strong military forces. They arrested 53,000 cartel members, but surprisingly, the Sinaloa cartel, led by El Chapo, escaped major arrests with only 1,000 members caught. Later investigations found out that El Chapo had betrayed his own cartel members and gave up information about other cartels to the US and Mexican authorities. Because of this, his legal problems eased up in 2008. Even with some cartel members arrested, drugs and violence continued in the streets. Rumors spread that El Chapo was seen in Guatemala, Honduras, and being generous in Mexican restaurants like Juarez, where the cartel burned down a restaurant after he visited. In 2009, Mexico offered a reward of $2.1 million, and the US offered $5 million for information leading to his capture. However, experts said that the war on drugs had cost the US around $50 billion each year, with hundreds of millions spent trying to find El Chapo. Again, I think, it's like, it was a good thought, the war on drugs, but I think the drugs won. So in 2009, El Chapo told his top men to defend the drug shipments, even if it meant shooting at the US or Mexican authorities. Some people claimed he was in a town called Guanaceví, but undercover soldiers who went there were later found dead with a warning sign saying they'd never catch Chapo. Rumors about his whereabouts continued from Argentina to Europe, but most believed he hid in a rugged part of Mexico away from helicopters and trucks. Despite all this, some people still claimed to see him about, but it was never really confirmed. On February 21st, 2012, Mexican police nearly caught El Chapo in Los Cabos, Baja California, thanks to a tip from the US. He had planned to meet a female professor worker there, but rescheduled when she said it wasn't a good day. The police arrested her, Chapo's chef, and his pilot. It seemed like Chapo could predict the future, but really he used his private jets and changed how he communicated with people just to stay ahead. The US even made a secret plan to send in the Navy SEALs to capture him, but Mexico's military didn't agree with the plan. Which, I don't know, man. Anyways, I'm not gonna armchair world politics. In 2013, there was a rumor that he was actually shot in Guatemala, but they turned out to be false. WikiLeaks confirmed that he was alive in northern Guatemala, dealing with health issues like diabetes and heart disease from gaining weight. A breakthrough, though, came when Dutch police arrested Jose Gamboa, leader of the Sinaloa cartel's assassin squad and one of Chapo's top logistic guys. This gave the DEA insights to how the cartel operated. They believed Chapo was tired of hiding and was spending more time in Calacun, Sinaloa, eating at restaurants. They tracked a signal from his phone to his safe house, but he escaped through a tunnel just as they broke in. The tunnel led to a staircase, and he fled faster than the police could catch him. The Mexican Navy was chasing El Chapo in an underground tunnel, and above ground, the Mexican Army was patrolling, as well as a US drone was flying overhead. Even the famous Houdini couldn't escape from them. But the Navy only found the tunnel ended at a river. What they didn't know, though, was El Chapo used a sewage system which ran to a storm drain. There, with his right-hand man, Ramirez, they escaped in a car. Later, Ramirez's phone signal was revealed, and they were actually in Mazatlan. On February 21st, 2014, the Mexican Navy, DEA, US Marshals, and Homeland Security were in Mazatlan to catch him. Following Ramirez's signal to Miramar condos, they stormed room number 401 and found Ramirez with the gun. In another room were Chapo's 2 young girls with a babysitter. Chapo and his wife were in yet another room. They arrested Chapo without a fight, and he looked like an ordinary dad as they led him away from his $1,200 a month apartment. Finally caught after a long chase, U.S. authorities celebrated the capture as a major victory. Attorney General Eric Holder called it a historic achievement linking Chapo to global drug violence. Chapo was soon transported to a high-security prison in the U.S. by Black Hawk helicopters, where he wouldn't have the luxury he had before. Chapo's life in prison was harsh. He had a bare room with just a bed, shower, and toilet under constant camera surveillance. He spent 23 hours a day alone and couldn't interact with any of the other inmates or even talk to guards unless they gave him orders. Despite once being rich, he got only $48 a month from the government for hygiene products with no outside money allowed. Mexico charged him for his drug crimes while the U.S. sought extradition. In 2014, Mexico's Attorney General refused U.S. extradition, worried Chapo might get a lighter sentence for giving up other criminals. Questions arose about his isolation when he joined a hunger strike with another inmate. Though he wasn't supposed to communicate with them, how did you communicate with them? This raised many questions and concerns in the U.S. because, well, he shouldn't have been talking to anybody. He faced actually very serious charges for running a drug empire and using assassins, which the USA is not really going to look kindly on. Chapo's lawyers fought extradition, arguing it would violate his rights under Mexico's laws. The case would continue, adding more twists to his already unbelievable story. Chapo was eventually sentenced to spend his life in a Mexican prison for more than 100 years. By July 2015, over a year after he was jailed, everyone thought he'd grow old behind bars. But on July 11th, everything would change again. That evening, he disappeared from his cell in an unbelievable way. He was last seen on camera going to take a shower at 8:52 p.m. The shower area wasn't watched by cameras, and when guards checked, he had vanished. Below the shower, they found a hole with a ladder made from PVC pipes. It led to a big tunnel with tracks where a modified motorcycle waited. This tunnel stretched for over a mile and ended inside of a house under construction. Nearby residents noticed some strange activity, but thought it was just normal construction work. Many people wondered how the prison staff didn't notice a tunnel being built, and experts criticized both Mexican and U.S. authorities for letting Chapo escape once more, especially since he was known for building tunnels. After his arrest in 2014, authorities discovered several tunnels actually leading out from houses of Culiacan, plus the sophisticated super tunnels his cartels used for smuggling the white powder under the U.S. border. Chapo was famous for tunneling. How could you guys not see this coming? Similar to actually how Ted Bundy was known for his crimes against youngish women. His associates then took their time digging a tunnel that was spacious with lights and ventilation, almost like a professional job. It became a huge embarrassment, leading to nearby areas declaring emergencies and even shutting down the nearest airport. A massive manhunt began across the Mexican state as armed police stopped vehicles everywhere. Inside the prison, around 30 employees were held and questioned. A U.S. expert on crime trends commented to the New York Times, calling it a nightmare for Mexico and a major concern for U.S. law enforcement. This incident highlighted why many wanted Chapo extradited, that they didn't really trust Mexican prisons to hold him, and considering he could just keep tunneling under them, I mean, yeah, I kind of get it. When Mexican Attorney General confidently declared Chapo wouldn't be extradited and brushed off the escape concerns, it backfired spectacularly when Chapo escaped again. Talk about egg on your face. The Attorney General was replaced just shortly afterwards. 7 officials, including 2 from Mexico's Secret Service and some prison staff, were arrested. 6 others were detained, and the prison directors and staff were all fired. It was unclear if anyone helped inside, for him to escape. Possibly only his family and cartel members were involved, but basically you're gonna need a pound of flesh, or at least a couple pounds of flesh, for this complete screw up. So after El Chapo escaped, a Twitter account in his name appeared, seemingly mocking those hunting him. In Spanish, he insulted Donald Trump and criticized the Mexican president. People wondered how he got on Twitter so quickly. U.S. media suspected the tweets came from Chapo himself, and Interpol was alerted as airports were on high alert and police intensified searches across cities and towns. The Mexican government even sought help from Colombian officials experienced in cartel hunts. Days passed with no sign of Chapo, intensifying desperation. It later emerged that he had been whisked away to a half-built house and then to a warehouse and finally flown by private plane to a hideout in Sinaloa's mountainous La Tuna area. There, he aimed for more fame and mingled with a Hollywood star. El Chapo first gained attention from celebrities when actress Kate Del Castillo reached out to him in 2012, publicly expressing more trust in him than in governments. Which, I mean, I get it. She proposed he should traffic in love instead of drugs. Okay, People from Hollywood are really dumb. Like, that's something to take into consideration, but what is that statement? Surprisingly, though, Chapo took a liking to her despite a statement like that. His lawyers contacted her about making a movie of his life. This is where actor Sean Penn entered the picture. Through Castillo, Penn arranged to meet with El Chapo at his mountain hideout. Penn understood the risks, knowing Chapo's violent reputation and cartel activities. During their meeting, Chapo described his humble beginnings and claimed he wasn't inherently violent. He also said he supplies more heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and marijuana than anyone else in the world, and I believe it. He boasted about owning a fleet of submarines, airplanes, trucks, and boats. Their communication, though, inadvertently exposed Chapo's location, leading Mexican authorities to raid the hideout. Chapo narrowly escaped again, fleeing in a helicopter with 2 women identified as his chefs and a young girl. U.S. authorities, frustrated by Chapo's celebrity contacts and ongoing evasion, supported another joint operation with Mexico dubbed Operation Black Swan. The U.S. Army Elite Counterterrorism Unit Delta Force provided tactical advice but did not directly participate in the raids. The Mexican Navy received intelligence that armed guards were present at his house in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, where El Chapo was expected to arrive on January 8, 2016. They conducted a raid early in the morning, anticipating high-level members of Chapo's organization to be present. The operation involved police, Army personnel, and 17 specialists from Mexico's Special Forces. Upon entering, a firefight ensued, resulting in the deaths of 5 of Chapo's men and injuries to 6 others, compared to 1 injured Special Force member. The raid uncovered a cache of weapons, including assault rifles, sniper rifles, and RPG, as well as armored vehicles. Chapo, alerted by the gunshots, escaped through a tunnel, again, hidden behind a mirror with his chief assassin, El Cholo Ivan, as they navigated through the tunnels and emerged, attempting to flee in a stolen vehicle. Police across the state quickly identified Chapo's vehicle by its license plate number and promptly stopped him and his associate. Chapo attempted to bribe the officers with a large sum of money, houses, and promise of good jobs, but the officers refused the bribe this time. In response, Chapo threatened the men, saying, "You are all going to die." The officers then radioed their superiors and were informed that a large number of assassins were heading their way to free Chapo and his associate. They were instructed to go directly to a motel and await the arrival of special forces. Following these orders, they complied, and Chapo was once again apprehended by the authorities. They were transported to Mexico City and returned to the same prison from which he had previously escaped. Good plan! What's the definition of insanity? Mexican and U.S. officials praised the cooperation and celebrated Chapo's capture as a significant success in the war on drugs. Again, let's not celebrate too early. However, as events would show, removing Chapo had little impact on the drug trade flowing into the U.S. and globally, unfortunately, because there's kind of another big player out there, and they're kind of our rival on the geopolitical stage, I guess you could call it. Anyways, Chapo and his lawyers attempted to resist extradition, but this time their efforts were unsuccessful. After being extradited to the U.S. amidst high-profile incidents, including the assassination of a Mexican judge, El Chapo was sentenced on July 17, 2019 to life in prison plus 30 years. And remember, life in prison is only 25 years if I remember correctly. He was then ordered to repay $12.7 billion, none of which has been recovered. His current prison, ADX Florence, is considered escape-proof with extensive surveillance and strict protocols. And it's built on granite, so it's hard to no, it's not built on granite. I just wanted to add that. Chapo spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, closely monitored, even during his brief outings. And with these harsh conditions, he's described it as torture both physically and mentally. His absence in Mexico triggered a violent turf war, leading to a record high murder rates linked to the drug wars in 2017 and 2018. And while lockdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic temporarily reduced these violence issues, drug abuse kind of soared globally. The US now focuses on capturing El Mincho from the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, offering substantial rewards. Critics argue that removing El Chapo did not stem the drug trade or anything. In fact, addiction in this country is horrific. If you go to any of the cities, you'll see what I'm talking about. And it kind of labels the ongoing war on drugs as catastrophic failure with enduring social and health impacts. The war on drugs continues to face scrutiny globally for its persistent failures and detrimental impacts. Despite decades of effort and immense financial expenditure, illegal drug markets remain robust, accessible in almost every corner of the world, and we're not really doing that much to stop it. Again, go to Seattle and you can walk through literally a crack cloud. I did it during PAX West one time. It was wild. So efforts by the law enforcement to disrupt the drug supply often lead to increased violence and instability, exacerbating rather than alleviating societal problems. Critics, including organizations like Human Rights Watch, highlight that a significant portion of arrests, up to 80%, are for possession rather than trafficking, disproportionately affecting users rather than the major players in the drug distribution. This approach not only strains judicial and prison systems, but also fails to address underlying issues of addiction and public health. Financially, the war on drugs has cost the United States alone over $1 trillion since its inception, with similar economic burdens felt globally. Despite these high costs, political incentives often favor maintaining tough drug policies as a means to secure votes and appear strong on crime. The high-profile capture and extradition of El Chapo, emblematic of the war on drugs, kind of underscores the persistent challenges in combating drug trafficking and organized crime. It's extremely difficult. Yet, the availability and demand for illicit substances remains completely unaffected, indicating that the limited effectiveness of the current strategies are just that, exceedingly limited. In contrast, Portugal's approach to decriminalization of drug possession in 2001 has garnered attention for its focus on public health over punitive measures. This policy shift has shown promising results, including reduced overdose deaths, lower rates of HIV infections among drug users, and increased access to treatment and rehabilitation services. But despite these successes, global adoption of similar decriminalization policies has been slow, with many countries still clinging to traditional punitive approaches. Critics argue that continuing these same ineffective strategies while expecting different outcomes, often likened to Albert Einstein's definition of insanity, fails to address the root cause of drug-related issues. And if you really want to know how to look at that crap, you have to wonder who is getting money on the back end for that much money being spent. As always, if you follow the money, you'll see where it goes, and then you can figure out why programs are still in place that seem completely ridiculous. But that's not for me to figure out. I'm way down here in the trenches, and I'm basically a nobody anyways. So, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave me a like, would be great of you, and subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and all my other stuff, channel links, whatever, down in the not the comments, in the description if you would like to take a look at those. And speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Brayley Hoover, Grayson West, Stupid Fox, and Trash Panda and Trenchcoat. Thank you very much, guys. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beaver Malaga and Wet Skeleton. At the First Hand Accounts tier, we have Cody Cherry Drake, Pimp Daddy Shamrock, Yeeps. And at the Second Hand Account tier, we have Bianca, Kanan Johnson, Fred Rush, and Troy. And to the rest of my patrons, I appreciate y'all's support as well. It goes a long way towards helping out. And again, it's greatly appreciated. So that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.